Greetings, science fiction and fantasy enthusiasts. Do you read books? Do you watch films? Do you hate deodorant? Then welcome to our podcast. You're listening to No Deodorant in Outer Space with Ryan Sean O'Reilly. Now, let's get started.
Head and hands need a mediator. The mediator between head and hands must be the heart. But where is our mediator, Maria? Wait for him. He will surely come. We will wait, Maria, but not much longer. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of No Deodorant in Outer Space. My name is Ryan Sean O'Reilly, and I'm broadcasting to you all the way from the deep reaches of the Metropolis. Right next to the
nether reaches of the soul.
That's right. Right next to the fire heart pump of the mother of the city. And in the background, a freight train is going by.
That's industry, right?
That's industry right
Pure
there.
Pure industry.
Speaking right now is James Rauch, a.k.a. Beam. Beam, welcome back.
Oh, thanks. It's great to be back. I haven't done a podcast in quite a while and forgotten how much it sucks.
And I'm here to help remind you.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
So we already have reacquainted our audience to you, but joining us also on this episode is Rich Bacon. Rich, my old friend, how are you?
I'm doing swell. How are you, Rye?
Doing good. Let me get you on that mic a little bit closer.
I'm doing swell. How are you, Rye?
All right, we're doing good. We got a fire blazing. It's blazing on brushwood right now. Hopefully it's everything's good and everything's safe.
It's fine.
We're out here on the outer reaches of Chicagoland, the greater metropolis, and a freight train is literally going by in the background to great symbology of industry.
It's reminding us of industry. It never stops. It's
yes.
Like midnight right now, and still the forces of industry pump on, won't let us sleep.
While I do that, Beam, why don't you go tend to the fire a little bit?
It's fine. It's good.
Okay. It looks like it's expanding.
It's a pleasure to burn.
It looks like it's expanding a little bit beyond the firing.
I thought this was a book club. It's a pleasure to burn. Doesn't that mean something to you
people? It does look
people?
like it's expanding beyond the firing.
No, it's fine.
Just saying, since there are three men together, two of us think you're not doing a good job with the fire. It's just a natural law.
I don't understand what the problem is. I mean,
it looks like it's getting beyond the firing.
It's fine.
The tongue of the fire looks like it's licking the branches.
It's the natural result of heat and oxygen. It's we're just part of the embers, really, burning on the side.
Very well. On this episode,
it's not going to hurt. It's not going to hurt you guys.
This is the second half of our podcast where we're going to cover Metropolis, the movie, which was directed by Fritz Lang.
It's a movie?
It is a movie.
Oh, thank God.
Is there speaking?
A very long, long time ago. There is no speaking.
A very long movie, too.
Yes, and a very long movie. To start off the show, I'd like to go through our opening salvos, just like to sum up our thoughts on, the movie and what you all think. Let's go, Rich, to you. Do you have, what's your opening comment, just like a one-sentence summary or whatever, about the movie?
Metropolis, the movie, is a visual masterpiece. It is a sci-fi classic, and it is something that everyone should see, certainly select portions of, if not the whole thing.
Excellent. Beam, what about you? Your kind of like a one-sentence summary about the movie.
I did three, so,
Well, I guess if you like movies where there's no talking...
Shut up!
Okay.
It's a silent film. You know what I'd love to know about this movie is how they made it. If you went back in time like 100 years and tried to film something and create some sort of artistic imagery, you imagine the complicated nature of that. This movie, it was transcendent.
And I think that's a discussion point for later.
Yeah. All right. So then my opening comment...
I'm all about discussion for later.
My opening comment is going to be, it's a bombastic production complemented by subtle, silent performances made with painstaking and innovative attention to detail. that come together in a glorious 20th century fable which changed film forever.
Glorious 19th century.
Wow, he came up with that on his own. That was spontaneous, people.
Well, it was not spontaneous. I wrote it out ahead of time.
No, it's dark. You can't read that. That's amazing. You don't have a headlamp on.
Charlie Chaplin would have loved this movie.
He probably did.
That's a good possibility. I actually was.
Well, I did have a Hitler mustache, so you know.
All right.
This is where the train goes off the rails.
No, it's right there.
Oh, there it is. It's still on the rails.
I can hear it. It's going well.
Yeah, the train of industry is literally within our purview. So, this movie was directed by Fritz Lang. So let's move right on to the bio portion of the podcast.
Good old Fritz.
And talk about this infamous director, Fritz Lang. He was born December 5th, 1890. He died August 2nd, 1976. He was Austrian-German filmmaker, born in Vienna.
He was born in Bavaria, I thought.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure what the borders are of Bavaria, but...
well, it's worth pointing out. I mean, if we're talking about German filmmaking, you know, they were separate countries.
Yeah.
There was the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Well, he was born in Vienna, so that's Austria, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So anyway,
he's the son of Anton Lang, who was an architect and construction company manager, and Pauline Lang. His parents were of Moravian descent. They were actually practicing Roman Catholics, but his mother was Jewish-born, and she converted to Catholicism. They took their religion very seriously. Lang, I saw that he was basically an atheist, but he felt that religion should be taken into account. He was not dismissive of religion because he thought religion was important in ethics. And he said,
as I said in She's the One, you know, good Ed Burns Irish Catholic movie. Just because I don't believe in God doesn't mean I'm not a good Catholic.
He was Marxist, I thought. No?
Not that I'm aware.
There are a lot of Marxist tones in this movie.
You know what? I've heard arguments against that actually because of the call for the mediator, because the communists would not actually want someone in between. They would actually want to show the movie. They would actually want to take control.
They wouldn't show the movie because of the Marxist tone.
Maybe. But Lang, after finishing school, he briefly attended a technical university in Vienna. He pursued civil engineering and then switched to art. Eventually, in 1910, he left. He traveled throughout Europe and Africa, later Asia. We know that he had a fascination with India later. He studied painting in Paris eventually. Then World War I hits. He does his service there. At one point, he gets a service revolver. We know what happens with that, which we talked about with his first wife. He returns to Vienna. He's in the war. He's wounded. Looks like he was wounded 3 times. Got shell shock. He was eventually discharged from the army. I actually heard him in an interview talking about having, I forget what his problem was. If he had a hernia or something like that, he couldn't go into the army at first or into service at first, and eventually he could. When he was discharged, he did some acting in the Viennese theater circuit for a short time, and then he met Eric Palmer in his Berlin-based production company. He did a brief stint in writing and worked as a director for the German film studio UFA, who was involved with Metropolis. And he was associated with the German Expressionist movement. Expressionism, it's not just films, it's also paintings. But I believe it centers around exaggeration. There's buildings with very sharp angles and great heights and crowded environments. This is all from Wikipedia. They rejected naturalistic depictions. Everything is sort of distorted to convey emotion. I believe that's kind of expressionism.
And other thoughts were that they almost had unrealistic depictions because of the lack of funds. Again, because of the punitive measures of the Treaty of Versailles, the horrible German economy, they basically came up with these unrealistic backgrounds that everyone kind of accepted because they needed to have something back there, and peppy and cheap goes a long way.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it resulted in a very stylized style.
Yes. Which actually inspired film noir in many ways.
Yes.
And Fritz Lang, when he came to the United States, was actually involved in many people may call them cut-rate films, but they were very inspirational for the film noir.
Yes, he probably is one of the originators of noir.
Yes.
Which came out of the German Expressionist movement and inspired people like Alfred Hitchcock and Orson Welles.
Yes, and in fact, Alfred Hitchcock
And Bauhaus.
came over to UFA back in, I think it was
Oh, really?
1924 or 1925, to observe their filmmaking and such. And whenever anyone says that Alfred Hitchcock, whenever everyone would ask Lang that Alfred Hitchcock found, inspiration in some of his films, Lang would get offended and things like that. But it was.
Why would you ever get offended by that?
I don't
first of all?
know, because they're rival filmmakers and they all get mad about it. Oddly
weren't
enough,
rivals.
Fritz Lang somehow turned into like the prototypical Hollywood director before he even got to Hollywood, because he managed to find that persona in Berlin. But that's a different discussion point.
Yeah. So before he gets to Berlin, he makes Metropolis, but he also makes M. And we talked about in the last episode that he has an affair with Thea von Harbou, and then they eventually get married. His first wife commits suicide, and then this starts this 13-year partnership, and they do a bunch of films, and they're very successful. Then the World War II breaks out. He flees. But before we get into Metropolis, M was another one of his very popular. I think that's one of the first noir films, which starred Peter Lorre. I have not seen M. I don't know if either of you guys have, but I think it's supposed to be very good.
I have not. It's supposed to be tremendous.
Yeah.
The legendary scene in that, or pardon me, and I think it's something you're going to bring up later, but we'll bring that up. But it's
Go
one
ahead,
of his,
go ahead, bring it up.
Well, it's one of his tyrannical outbursts and
Oh,
such.
yeah.
So we'll talk about that later. But M is supposed to be one of his great ones. But by the time
Yeah.
he got to the United States, no one ever talks about him as a creative genius. This is his creative genius phase.
Yeah, he does M. He does a bunch of other films, and then eventually he and Thea divorce, and Lang was known as a storyteller. So he has this narrative, and
I guess the question is always, why should we care? Like, what
well,
What is it about him
He's
that-
very influential. Okay, so Alfred Hitchcock, Orson Welles, they're inspired by his style. Lang is considered one of the originators of film noir, which is a very popular genre that evolves out of a film.
But Hitchcock broke away from their style.
Hitchcock is inspired by Lang. He is.
You think?
Oh no, he is. I don't think it's disputed.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, in this day and age, a lot of the folks are sending their own film crews to the different countries to watch the production. So England sent some people to Germany. Germany sent some people to Hollywood, and I think Ryan can probably talk more on that. Is that Fritz Lang, I believe, visited Hollywood in 25 or 26 and can talk about what he saw there. But I mean, like, they're all cross-pollinating at this point because it's a friendly globe at that era.
I don't think it was friendly. I think it was more rebellious. I think, like Hitchcock especially, he fought the common sense of filmmaking and
but Lang
sort
is
of
not coming.
struck out his own
Not in 25.
path.
Yeah, and Lang.
No, but
and-
later on.
and
he-
Lang-
Yeah, later on.
And Lang is on the forefront. Okay, he's on the forefront. He's like an originator at this point. He's part of the German Expressionist movement. He sort of creates the noir movement. Not probably purposely. It evolves out of what his style and what he's interested in doing in his collaboration with Thea von Harbou. And he makes M and a bunch of other films, and this inspires other people. And he's very influential and very respected. Lang is an interesting guy. He's very much a tyrant on set, which we can get into later. But he's also a storyteller. He knows story. So his version of what happened. Okay, at some
He
point
created an image.
he also-
Yes,
he
he
created
yes.
a style and an image.
an
and
image for himself.
He used mirrors and he used
But
these
he-
different cinematic.
But he used an image. He created an image for himself. Like for instance, for one of the famous stories is he said that is it Goebbels? Goebbels and Hitler
yeah.
loved Metropolis, and at some point
Well,
he
left.
He has a meeting with Goebbels, and Goebbels tells him they want Fritz Lang to be the movie guy for the Nazi party and to make movies for them.
No, they told him that they wanted him to be a honorary German. They wanted to strip him of his Jewish heritage.
No,
and
no. They tell him they want him to make movies, and he says, "Hey, just so you know, my mother has Jewish heritage." And then they tell him, "Oh, don't worry about that. We decide who's Aryan." That's what.
That's
according to him.
That's supposedly
and that's
a
when
myth.
he left, right? That's
And
when he went to
like
Paris?
again, this man is a blatant self-promoter, a blatant myth builder, and my point is, he was Hollywood before it was even Hollywood.
Yes, he's interviewed by William Friedkin. I watched the whole interview. He tells this whole long tale about it. He had this meeting with Goebbels about. He's sitting there in Goebbels' office, sweating it out. Where Goebbels is like, "We want you to be the filmmaker for the Third Reich." And he's just like, yes, I'm honored. In the meanwhile, he's telling this full drama. He's like, he's watching a clock out the window. He's watching a clock out the window.
He's like, I'm out.
And wondering when the banks are going to close. He can go get money to flee the country. Okay? He just yeses Goebbels until the meeting's over. And then the next day he flees the country. Although records contradict this. He actually didn't leave the country like the next day. He tells everyone he left the country the next day after this confrontation with Goebbels, or this conversation with Goebbels. He actually, I think, was back and forth for a while. He went to Paris. He eventually divorces Thea von Harbou. So the point is, Fritz Lang likes to tell stories. He appreciates a good story. He even tells a good story about his own life, his own mythology.
So there's sort of a drama around it that he creates?
Yes. He likes to create a mystique even about himself. He goes to the United States. He makes a number of films. He doesn't seem to have a huge artistic flair like he did in Germany, but he has some notable films. I was at The Big Heat was one of them. I can't remember. There's a bunch of them that are considered good, but he doesn't have the groundbreaking success artistic-wise that he had in Germany.
No, he rubbed people the wrong way.
Yeah,
and
he was very difficult to work with.
But The Big Heat is one, which is streaming on Amazon Prime. I actually want to get to that. It's actually supposed to be a very good Lee Marvin film. And
Lee Marvin throws coffee in some person's face.
Yeah, he throws it in the gangster's Maul's face and such, which was considered horribly violent at the time. And let's face it, throwing boiling coffee in someone's face is horribly violent at any time. Anyway,
Yes.
not endorsing coffee throwing.
Yeah. But he ran against a lot of frustration in Hollywood with them telling him what to do, and then he became notoriously difficult to work with. But he still made some notable films. He just wasn't quite considered as visionary as he was when he was in Germany in the beginning of his career.
Fact.
Lang goes on. He makes films the rest of his life. At some point, his health is failing. He starts to go blind. He's literally wearing an eye patch. And I think at some point, the Americans have to tell him to stop wearing the eye patch because he looks like a Bond villain.
The version I heard was that he was wearing a monocle. And that they had to tell him to stop wearing the monocle like a German, villain.
That might be true, but
I've seen the picture with the eye patch.
Yes.
Here's the thing: John Ford was doing the same thing at the same time. And if you're going to say that to tell John Ford to do anything, I'm going to go ahead and say that you're crazy, because no one was telling John Ford crap in Hollywood.
Give me some context. John Ford is famous for what?
John Ford is famous for having more Best Director Oscars than Spielberg. Still.
Oh. What's some movies he's on?
Let's see. How Green Was My Valley. But you'd remember him best for the John Wayne Cavalry trilogy. At this point, of course, you being a good South Side Irishman would remember The Quiet Man. He directed The Quiet Man, and which was one of the first Technicolor movies, and was especially one of the first Technicolor movies directed in Ireland on location, because Hollywood didn't do things on location. Let's see, oh my goodness. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, and so forth. So
These are all John Ford.
yes. Which is also Lee Marvin, by the way, at one of his worst.
So Lang continues to work in Hollywood. He works projects. People get sick of him. He's got notable films even in Hollywood. He eventually dies of a stroke in 1976 out in Hollywood. That's how he meets his end. Like I said in the last episode, he speaks a little bit more fondly about Thea von Harbou at the point of his death. But he's also, he's sort of a notorious personality, and he's known for making his own myth.
Yeah, he was a passionate man, and he lived on those passions.
Yes. He's also notorious being known for being like a tyrant on set.
Passion.
And there is a lot of stories. I can't think of a single one right now.
Well, a good one is on the set of M.
Okay,
on
go
the
ahead.
set of M, he had Peter Lorre. And
which for some reason he thought Peter Lorre would be considered a very innocent looking, but I guess
Yeah, well, in this particular movie, it was about a is it fair to say a pederast or a child killer?
He's a child killer, but I don't think...
Well, it's a child killer. The pederasty is probably implied. But anyway.
Yeah, I don't think they show a lot of
Well, it's
what
a
happened.
child killer. Everyone's searching for the child killer, including, I don't know, bums and, like, you know, everyone takes up the patriotic cause to catch this child killer. And
yeah, and it's worth noting that Fritz Lang, as passionate as he was, I think he spent some of his time in an insane asylum, and he interviewed criminals and notorious child killers for research for this, and he actually cast criminals in the movie. Legitimate criminals, I think, played in the jurors of that film.
I had no idea.
Yeah, I believe so.
Huh. Well, anyway, at some point, there's a scene where Peter Lorre gets thrown down a set of stairs. And literally, they made Peter Lorre do this scene multiple times and literally threw him down the stairs multiple times.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, Peter Lorre took exception to this. So years later, back in America, when Fritz Lang wanted to cast him in a film, Peter Lorre declined, and Fritz Lang was really confused why that Peter Lorre was not enthusiastic with working with him again since, quote-unquote, he made his career.
Yeah, and there's a lot of stories if you go on Wikipedia, and I even found a video, like the 8 insane directions by Fritz Lang while he was a movie director. So he was known for being very passionate. Like in Metropolis, he cast the actress to play Maria, and also he used the same actress to play the robot. And he didn't use a stunt double for any of the robot stuff. And she was in this very uncomfortable costume that was cutting her. And at some point, I think she passed out. She said she couldn't even breathe because of the way the costume fit. And he had her keep doing things. There was other stories about, I think because Germany was going through depression, they had literally starving children cast as extras in the flood scenes. He had the actors in cold water, and they supposedly kept the water purposely cold during the movie. When he had the actress who played the robot, what was her name? Brigitte Helm? I forget what her name is.
Yeah, I think that's right.
He had her jumping for a rope to catch it, and all they did was put mattresses underneath.
Yeah, she was
that
jumping
must
off
have
the
been
roof.
the cathedral scene then, huh?
Yeah.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, he used the actual actress to do all this stuff, and
Like drove her to tears.
yeah, he drove her to tears. Yeah, and some of the extras were extremely cold, and there was like one of the noted actors gave his coat to one of the extras because it was so miserable. Like, there's like tons of stories about him being a tyrant. He's a very passionate guy that probably people like Hitchcock and stuff could get behind because Lang was a visionary. But if you had to work with him, it wasn't fun.
Yeah, it sounds terrible. If you watch the movie, like, you can see the suffering, and when he explodes the M machine, I think it is, the joke was he didn't have to try very hard to get the actors to look like they were suffering because they actually were, because the steam was like shooting them, and it sounded awful.
Yeah. So in some ways, he was very inspirational.
It'd be like, Ryan, if you were going to film a movie and you were going to run us through like the rigors of acting, and you decided that you wanted to reach a certain, podcast like excellence, but you weren't too concerned with the human aspect of the suffering of your actors, and you just said, I want this, I want that. You're going to read this terrible book, and
you'd need a mediator. You'd need a heart between.
There was no heart. There was no heart.
But
kind of like this podcast. Kind of like reading Metropolis and watching the movie. It's like there's just a
You
lot
have
of
no
suffering.
heart. If you had read that book beforehand, you never would have subjected us to it again.
Yeah, he had no concerns about
No, he
the
had no
suffering
idea.
of the
He was
people
ignorant.
involved. He would, put children in freezing cold water. And
That's right. We need a heart.
Didn't he shave like over 1,000 people's heads or something, and then
yeah, there was like a ton of like bald people he cast in the movie. He just took advantage of anything he could. He was like Joe Fredersen. He was just driven.
He had a vision, and he went for it. And you know what? At that point in time, he could.
At that point in time, he created a masterpiece.
And, 90 years later, we are praising his efforts.
That's very true. Well, I think that's pretty good overview of Lang. I don't know if there's anything else you want to talk about with him personally before we get into the film.
No, I'm good.
You're good?
Nope.
Okay. The film Metropolis came out in 1927 from UFA and Perrofamet. It starred Alfred Abel. The film is pretty closely tied to the book, although a lot of the occult and religious, well, there is still like religious themes like crosses and stuff, but the occult stuff is very taken out and played down. I think Rich, like the organ scene is cut out.
He simplified a lot.
Yeah. The plane scene with Josephat, that's cut out. That pastoral element we got into in the last episode, that's gone. Rotwing's house is not really shown in its full complexity. Was Joe Frederson's mother cut? I kind of feel like she was cut.
She was never anywhere.
Yeah,
no, she was cut.
Yeah, so that's
they
interesting.
lost a lot of footage though, so you don't know.
When they lost footage, they put in little comments as to what was supposed to be there.
Yeah.
So, and I thought that was actually a fascinating thing that was interesting to bring up. They know what was supposed to be in there because they went through the German censorship record.
That's right.
And therefore, they know what scenes are what and what
they
was
know the
supposed to be cut.
dialogue.
Right, and that's how they were able to redo it. So they know exactly what was cut out. And like the scenes that I recall that were cut out, most of them were like, wasn't it a fight between Joe Fredersen and
it was
Rotwang?
like the final fight.
No, it was a middle
wasn't it?
fight. It was a middle fight between Joe Fredersen and Rotwang before even the final fight. But yes.
Well, let's pause right there. This film has a life of its own, which is very, very interesting. The film is like it was like 2.5 hours when Lang finished it. He shows it, and immediately there's problems. It's got some praise, but there's problems showing it because it's so long. The studio, UFA, is on the verge of bankruptcy because they spent some money. So the origin of this film, which you talked about, you hinted at, Rich, in the last episode. Lang was on a ship to America with, I think, Eric Palmer, his producer, and also a famous architect, I forget his name. They pull up to New York, and they see all the skyscrapers from New York, and they see the skyscrapers and the lights from the skyscrapers, and it looks like stars hanging in the sky or something like that. They're very inspired. This architect writes a whole book about that, I believe. Lang claims the idea for Metropolis was born from that, from seeing New York and pulling up in the harbor and seeing this huge metropolis. So he comes back, works on it with his wife. They make the film. They release the film. We can get into the tie-in aspect next. But in making the film, it's immediately problematic showing it because it's so long. So the studios start making cuts. The studio has to make a deal.
Or the individual film houses make their own cuts.
Well, at some point, I think they make a deal with Paramount, right? And Paramount puts their guy on it and makes significant cuts, shortening the story a lot. There's probably more than a half an hour cut down. It's cut down to an hour and a half. I can't remember. It's sort of lost to history. So Paramount basically says, they make a deal with UFA to bail them out of bankruptcy, saying they have some kind of deal like you show a certain amount of American films and then we'll show some German films, and Metropolis is part of this deal. Fritz Lang is, I think, upset about this, but that's what has to happen. So for years, everyone knows about this film, but no one has seen like a complete version. And there's various efforts in, I don't know, the 50s or 60s, there's an effort to find like the true version of it, the reconstruction version. In 1984, a musician puts together a new version of it, and he colors it, and he adds like Queen and various other musicians at the time do a new soundtrack to it. They change from interstitial titles to subtitles, and they make this whole different kind of artistic version of it, which is fine. It's sort of like a different take on it.
I'd be fascinated to see that in the extended version, but anyway.
Yeah. It's just like a different take.
Yeah.
Then in 2001, they make a restoration attempt. They restore a good amount of the film, but they're still missing tons. In 2008, in a museum in Argentina, they discover a 2.5-hour version one. This, although it's not the original negatives, I think it was cut down from, I forget what millimeter, down to a 16 millimeter. And they discovered that there's 25 extra minutes of footage than they knew before. So when Paramount made their cuts to make it more appealable, They eliminated a lot of stuff, like the stuff relating to hell, because they thought hell sounded too much like H-E-L-L versus H-E-L. And it made the film supposedly more incoherent. So,
I guess I was also wondering. I always presumed that Hell was short for Helen. You know, why not just change her name to Helen?
Yeah, I don't know why they didn't just do
why
that.
Just, whatever.
But for whatever reason, they cut her out, and then they make the story more incoherent as they cut more and more parts out. So they find this long version that's missing only about 5 minutes. It's got 25 minutes. It got 20% more footage than they previously thought. Over the next couple of years, they worked painstakingly, and they have the full original score, which gives them cues on where things should be. And then, like Rich said, in 2001, they had the censor cards to fill in the blanks there. What we have now, from the 2010 version, which was completed in 2010, is we have almost 100% completed version of this film. It's still missing like 5 minutes or something like that. But it's very close to being the full version that existed the way that the director intended.
And the fascinating part is that, you know, where we're at is there's all this struggle to come up with the complete version and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But even the incomplete version has been considered a masterpiece of science fiction filmmaking since basically it became a subject of study in film schools. I would think it's fair to say, don't you?
Yeah, well, it's always been considered a masterpiece, right? Even before even before 2010 when we found the full version.
Much farther, yes.
In the less than full versions, have sort of been
I mean, like the 40s,
more.
50s, 60s, and beyond. It was always considered a masterpiece of science fiction film, even in its truncated state.
Yeah, that's true. That's a great point. It's always been sort of a treasure. So there's like an hour-long documentary associated with this. I think I watched it on YouTube. You can find it online, all about the restoration process and how they found it. So the version that's available, the 2010 version, it's very, very clear and it's a great quality. And then this extra 25 minutes of footage they found, that's less than crystal clear, and you can tell how that was added in. But they put it together very seamlessly with, I think it's new audio, obviously, and it's great. It's great to watch. So the film has its own interesting story. So if you're a film historian, you would love just reading about this film and how for years no one could find the actual thing, and then they find it in this obscure museum out in Argentina, and someone remembers showing a 2.5-hour version of it and having their finger on the film for that long. Because like back in the day when they used to watch these films, someone would have to crank the film, the whole time when people are watching it, and have a live orchestra, and it's a whole interesting thing if you want to learn about silent films and film history. That aside, the other interesting thing about this film is, as I've noted in our notes, it's sort of a gray area because on this podcast we don't do tie-in movies. We don't do novelization of movies. So like Star Wars is a movie that was written by George Lucas, and then eventually there was a novel that came out of that screenplay. That's a novelization. That's a tie-in book. It's based on a movie. That's different than an adaptation. What we primarily cover on this podcast is adaptions. Books that existed on their own right that were adapted to films. This is something different. It's sort of in a gray area. 2001: A Space Odyssey fits in this category because that was written alongside the movie. Thea von Harbou was married to Fritz Lang. She and him conceived of this book. She wrote this book. I found some disputes about when the book was completed, but clearly she conceived of the book, at least, if not before the movie. It was definitely released before the movie came out, and somewhat they did that on purpose to publicize the movie, but then they based the screenplay on the novel. They might have been kind of working on it at the same time, but it sort of exists in this gray area between a outright adaptation and an outright novelization. And Rich, you were talking to me earlier about how that sort of informed your viewing of this movie. And why don't you talk about that? You mentioned like opera and stuff, and I thought that was very interesting.
Well, there's a lot of different ways to kind of look at that, and I've got a couple different viewings. One is that you could almost look at the serialized release of the novel in magazines as effectively a trailer for the movie at that point. I mean, it could be building interest in going to go see the movie, or the other thing gets to be silent movie. Silent movie is so different from what we're used to in the talkies.
The talkies.
As I hate to put. But I mean, like, it is such a different performance. It's almost more related to Japanese kabuki theater than it is to the modern day theater, modern day film. In that no one's speaking, et cetera, but if you don't know what the story is going in, you're in trouble. So if you go to a modern day opera and you go to a classic, it's sung in Italian, it's sung in German, it's sung, et cetera, et cetera. And you need to have the synopsis so that you know what's going on. And in many ways, my thought was that the novel or the serialization of the story provided you with that synopsis, which allowed you to enjoy the unique performance of the silent movie. And that was one of my contentions.
I think that's a great point. And maybe it speaks to the fact that this was written sort of in conjunction with the movie. It wasn't written outright as its own thing. I mean, it was its own novel, but she made this knowing it was probably going to be made into a movie. Or she knew it was going to be made into a movie. That was the intention all along. I feel if anyone wanted to watch this movie, I would definitely recommend reading this book first. Because I felt it gave me a lot of context to watch the movie. More than I would have had if I watched it on its own. I mean, if you watched an earlier version where the 25 minutes that they found was missing, maybe you'd even have less context. But even the full context with the 2010 restoration, I felt watching or reading this book, and I mean, maybe you can say that about all books and movies, and that's what this podcast is about, because it's about books turned into movies. But I felt like that, what you mentioned about like an opera, that really hits home with this story. Like, I felt like I had a way better context for watching this film after reading the book. Even though I felt the book was slow, I appreciated the movie, I feel like, that much more.
Well, I mean, Beam, what do you think? I mean, it's a different mode of performance.
I think,
so therefore, to enjoy it, it doesn't help you to have a synopsis in order to enjoy it.
I think your comparison to kabuki films, or kabuki theater, is apt. It's not actually something I considered earlier. It's hard to watch a silent film. It really is. Especially, today's day and age, we're so indoctrinated almost in the current
in the
themes.
talkies.
But it is almost a kabuki style theater production. And I guess it's hard to see that and to appreciate it and to get beyond the limits of how old it really is. That's something I had not considered. But yeah, that actually changes it a little bit for me, because to consider the production and how you would create those visuals, there's a lot of depth there. I hadn't considered that, actually.
Now, I heard other podcasts say this, and I feel like I agree. I don't feel like the acting was overly melodramatic.
It was totally. No.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
I expected a lot more for a silent film than what I got. And
what I was surprised watching it was just the visual quality of it. If you ever go back and watch like old silent films, the quality of the filming it's just dated. I mean, they're using old equipment, and the clarity of it was shocking in a way, because
it's very clear, except for those.
Really is.
Except for the 25 minutes.
Except for those, and you can see the difference when they brought those parts that they lost, that they found in Buenos Aires, back in, the black lines going vertically down it.
Yeah,
it's. I suppose it's a triumph. It's hard to watch something like that and to qualify it, really, because it's so old. I hadn't considered the kabuki aspect of it.
Well, I mean, literally, I think that the silent movie era deserves its own. When you compare that to another movie, you almost need to take the word movie out of it, because people just have an expectation as to what a movie is, and I think it's unfair, because it's its own art form, and therefore your expectation is jaded. So anyway,
but I mean, when I watched this, that's what I went into it as. I was like, I'm going to watch a silent film. I wasn't like, I'm just going to watch a movie.
No, but I mean,
I prepared myself.
But it's not something in this day and age people are generally prepared for.
It's really not, because when you look at the history of film, and think like I mentioned in the last podcast, Marlon Brando changed film. he didn't just hold his hand to his chest and look up at the sky. Like, he actually acted like he was hurt, and it changed the way that acting. He changed the whole game, and everything pre-Brando. It's tough to watch and to keep that in mind that just hadn't happened yet. And I don't know.
I guess I disagree. I felt like I expected a lot more melodramatic pantomime from the actors.
Oh, there was so much, though.
I didn't feel that way. I was like, wow.
I mean, even when he was banging on the door, he's like banging
boom,
full-fisted on the door, and then he's hanging in the corner.
It was
like,
a lot more subtle. And
drenched in paint.
I disagree. Like, and another very interesting thing to me was the robot. When they have Maria...
When she stands up.
When she becomes the robot, and she changes over, and it's the same actress that plays Maria, and then Maria is the robot, and all she does is like make her head movements dart and her eyes flicker more, and I was like, that's sort of subtle.
You know what I think really the greatness of it was the flood scene. I mean, that was like that was the only moment of that whole movie that really like drew me in, and I was like, holy shit, things are getting heavy here. Like, as the kids are like sort of running out of the, they're running down the stairs and the water's splashing on them, and they're reaching up towards, the machine trying to like save themselves, and just that impending doom. That was like the one thing in that whole movie that really struck me as like, wow, this was the beginning of like dramatic film. Like,
and it was 100% less rapey than the book.
And exactly, there was less rape, and but the drama was there, like the building of the scene, like from the start of it when the water was sort of kind of creeping up through the ground, and then all of a sudden it started bursting everywhere. And I think, from our like you look at the cadence of like current film, the timing of it is shorter now than it used to be. And that scene dragged on forever, like as the water is spouting up from the ground, and he's sort of like, and he's showing the father looking through the hole, looking down at it, like that was impressive. I mean, I think like the progress from like the start of the flood to the end is really where that movie captured. I think that's where that movie became great.
Things that they couldn't do nowadays.
Well, I think that they wouldn't.
Yeah.
If you look at like Michael Bay films, like they'd never actually take like 10 minutes to show you the progression. Like it's so immediate. Like everything is just like impact, and like in that film, it just like it sort of drags on, and you sort of get to the point watching it where you're like, okay, what's going to happen next? But like I think it set the tone for everything that came after it in that scene. And
what, Rich? I was impressed with the visuals of this movie. There's always something going on. The background, there's electronics, there's technology. They invented camera techniques that are still employed today. I forget the name of it, the Schönbrunn technique or Schufstan technique.
Was that the mirrors that he used?
Yeah, like they would scrape away parts of mirrors and have actors doing stuff in the foreground. The mirrors would be reflecting models behind the camera. And that was even used in Return of the King, in Lord of the Rings.
When you think about the genius of it, if you were going to
go invented this stuff back then, it was still used.
The technology that you have on your phone right now is so far past what they had like available to them then to create that.
I know, but
it's impressive.
Yeah, you watch those, like they had like some animation and stuff. I was blown away. There's so much going on in this movie, just in the scenery, in the background.
The
electronics. This might be the first film of a mad scientist. I'm not sure. I thought I heard a podcast mention that.
Nosferatu, maybe.
Well, pardon me. Two things. One, you started off asking me a question, and you never got to the question. But part two of it is, one, if you're talking about the scenery, heck yeah, this scene is inspirational to almost every other mega city scene that you'll ever see. It's an inspiration to Blade Runner. My goodness,
yes.
If they could have had a Japanese woman in Yoshiwara above it, doing on the scene, they would have. I mean, they that was totally an inspiration. But it was an inspiration. I could not have been more stunned by some of the letters that were running on the buildings. You couldn't make out what they were saying, but you could make out the ticker tape letters that were going by on them. to do that.
Yeah.
The planes flying in between the buildings, well, that's just horrifying because of 9/11. But it, they had the planes, they had the trains, they had the automobiles. They,
the video phone.
They had a video phone. For like first
they had a video phone. And they had everything going on in that. It was a tremendous achievement.
The robot inspired C-3PO.
It certainly did. Although oddly, that's another thing I'd like to come back to is there's a difference between the way the robot was designed in the book versus the movie.
Well, go ahead, talk about that.
Well, okay, so in the book, the robot is described as being made of crystal with silver bones, and a misshapen mash for a head, and etc. And obviously, in the movie, this is a more solid metal kind of. I mean, it's not crystal. You can't see silver bones, etc., etc. I was more creeped out when
And then it turns into basically a human.
And then it basically turns into a human. And when I first encountered it in the book, I don't know, read about it, whatever. It gave me a more creepy feel because of that fact that it was built more like a human.
In the film or the book?
In the book, when it was the silver bones, when it was the crystalline, etc., etc., and that was what was. It gave me. It was a far creepier creature because also that was when Rotwang was more of a creature of occult, and in the movie the occult kind of features a bit dropped off.
Well, there's not a lot of occult stuff in the movie.
It can't make up its mind whether he's a cult or whether he's an inventor, and in either feature actually, but. Anyway, that was one thing that struck me.
I feel like looking at this from a modern viewpoint, there is so much going on visually that you don't get bored. I felt the acting was less dramatic than I thought it would be. I guess you would disagree, Jim.
Yeah, I do. I do.
Another thing I mentioned to you in texting about this, there's not subtitles in this. It's interesting in silent films because the actors do talk to each other. You see them talking, but you don't know what they're saying because it's a silent film. And then they stick these interstitial titles in between when you need to know something. So you don't have to do a lot of reading like you would with a subtitle movie.
And it's oversimplified when they...
Yeah, but
vastly.
But it works.
And it
works.
But Ryan talks about them talking. I mean, there is constant talking going on. But there
more than you'd think.
But there might be one interstitial every 3 minutes. Yeah. I mean, it was huge amounts of time in between when they would actually tell you the actual dialogue. At that point, it had to be something that moved the plot. Mm-hmm. Not just the scene. It had to be something that basically moved the plot.
Do you think that you would have been lost if you didn't read the book?
No,
I would say no.
No, but
okay.
You know what? That's kind of the whole point of that's my contention that it's a different form of acting and presentation than certainly the talkie.
I would say I was lost reading the book until I saw the movie.
And it comes together.
Yeah, it sort of shows you.
Okay.
Like when you read the book, the verbosity of it is simplified and things are just so palatable in the movie. It really boils it down so that you can understand what's going on a little bit better. I don't know. That book was tough to read. So, for me, the movie made a lot more sense.
Was the movie tough to watch?
Because it was a silent film, I think, yeah. I mean, I mean, when you look at the movies that we're used to seeing, like The Matrix or, common, modern masterpieces.
But you can see where they draw from this.
I thought the first 10 minutes were enthralling. I mean, it really caught me. The first 10 minutes were great. Mind you, it lasted for 2 hours and 10 minutes more. But,
2.5 hours.
Yeah, so it kept on going. But it really did a wonderful job, but that kind of goes back to the whole, you know what, I kind of view this as a different artistic art form, and you know what, having a synopsis ahead of time helped me maintain interest, because I wanted to see how they were going to do some of these things.
Yeah.
And
I was a little different.
And that helped me.
I used the movie as a reference point to understand the book, and I think I was sort of coming from a different angle on it. The movie made the book make sense, because there was just so much bizarre conflict involved in just from one paragraph to the next in the book. I didn't understand it. Not gonna lie, I
but
did
like-
not understand it.
So, Rye, you've asked consistently about whether things have been over dramatic, and Beam, you've said that they are, and
It was a style of the time in a way.
one, it was the style at the time, but there was another interesting comment that I thought was, that I wanted to make. Wow, I declared my own comment to be interesting.
Oh, that does sound loud.
Yeah.
When you throw wood on the fire.
Well, we didn't want to tell you not to, but anyway, it's more along the lines of that. Every time that Freder was on the screen, that man was holding his heart. Now, I don't know it's because whether he was supposed to be the heart and he was the mediator, but that guy had more vapors than Aunt Pitty Pat in, like, Gone with the Wind. I mean, like...
Well,
yeah,
I think that was actually that was what I felt was overly dramatic, was the way that they physically showed how they felt by touching certain parts of their bodies. I mean, that was total historical,
True. But he was also... I wasn't quite sure whether anyone believed whether he was supposed to be holding his heart all these times because he was the savior and he was
Well, I think
heart.
he was trying to show pain.
I
in
think
a
he
way,
was
like
probably too,
anguish, and that's once again where Brando, when Streetcar Named Desire, when he screams, he just lost his shit and started screaming. That changed acting forever. Before that, it was all hold your heart. It was all like theatrical, like more of like stage work almost, and kabuki style, where the emotions were represented through physical action versus, I don't know, the natural response that actors now will show through their behaviors. I don't know. That was my take. It's tough to reconcile just the distance of the history of it.
So, how many silent films have you watched?
I don't know if I've watched any.
I don't
I'm
know
sure
if I
I've-
have either.
I'm not sure that
I mean,
I've ever watched.
I'll tell a little aside. Like my son, I was talking to him about it a little bit, and he's like, "Was this before Creature from the Black Lagoon?" And I was like, "I don't know." And I looked it up historically. It's
It is?
30
years.
30 years prior. 30 years. That's like a lifetime to us. Like I'm 41. Like this movie came out in the 20s. Creature from the Black Lagoon is probably the earliest film that I ever watched in my life and actually enjoyed.
You got the 3D
30
goggles from 7-Eleven,
30
and you watch it on
years.
Svengoolie like the rest of us when it was on Fox.
Exactly. Thank you, Svengoolie. I've been trying to bring Svengoolie into this all
Rich
day.
Coes, we love you, man.
I mean, that was
Cozone.
30 years later. Like that's like an adult lifetime at this point. To think that this came out 30 years before Creature from the Black Lagoon. It's crazy.
Yeah. But that's part of the point is that I contend that silent film is its own art form, and one thing I wanted to bring up, and Rye, I saw this on your notes, and I don't know whether you guys have ever viewed or watched it, but Call of Cthulhu.
Call of Cthulhu, yeah.
Yeah. So
H.P. Lovecraft, yeah. We talked about it on this podcast.
And did you ever watch the 2005 silent film?
Yes, it's a modern version of silent film. I did.
I watched it as well.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That one was kind of an homage /
Yes.
updating, but I mean, like, I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed that one very much.
Yeah, I believe I did too. I'd have to go back and listen to that episode, but it's interesting. I mean, that's a modern version of doing a silent film.
True.
Yeah.
But that's...
And that's a hard topic to discuss, although the Cthulhu mythos is very, very popular. Now it's certainly very popular, but it's a hard story to cover.
Very true, but what I'm trying to get at is it's still, you have someone who's specifically going to do this. You almost have to get actors who are going to act in a specific style and direction.
Yeah.
And
it's different. You're not going to be heard when you say lines, so you have to convey more with your movements. That's why I'm saying, like, I expected the actors to be over the top with their pantomime, and I didn't feel like they were.
Maybe that'll be the new vinyl.
It's
like
interesting,
silent films will be
supposedly the main actor
there aren't enough silent films left.
90% of them were lost or something like that. Thea von Harbou, supposedly, she cast the lead actor who played Frederer because he was cast as some other normal actor.
He was an extra, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was just an extra, and she saw how hot he was, and she told him, hey, let's cast this extra as Frederer instead of who we had. And the guy did a good job.
And I do not believe that the actress was exactly a name actress either.
Right. I don't think most of them were. But I mean, I heard other podcasts say this, that she sort of stole the show with her eyes and her movement. I mean, when she was...
her crazy, borderline, crazy dancing?
Yes. When she is the robot and she is sort of enthralling the proletariat to
when
do
she
her
is
bidding.
in thrall. She is literally in thrall.
Yeah, she does a great job of distinguishing herself and saying, like, now I'm a robot, now I'm a different, kind of person.
Her crazy blinking, it was
or
amazing.
I'm not a person. Yeah, she blinks weird, and she does, like, some kind of weird dance, and she...
She does several weird The dancing alone was great. I listened to a couple of other podcasts, and they were, like, accusing her of doing the Elaine, so I wanted to see this thing. Too. And that was unjustified, as far as I was concerned. It may not be exactly common, but it was... Those were interesting scenes. If nothing else, the men really expressed that they were in lust with her, if nothing else. I'm not sure why.
Once again, another comparison to Hitchcock. He killed off that main actress in Psycho. I mean, she was like the biggest actress in the country, and he killed her off within the first third of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Those things didn't happen back then. So it's hard to contextualize, like, the
just
historical...
Remember, but Psycho was what, 1961?
61, yeah.
And we're talking about 1927.
I know.
Wow.
Just to think back about... that was, once again, 30 years before.
I guess that's what blows me away. Is because
film has changed so much before we even were born. It's hard to understand all the complexities of it.
I guess when you'd go watch a silent film, a lot of times there would be a live orchestra, and you would be expected to talk during it.
Well, and in silent films, that once again, they filmed it sort of as an ongoing thing. Like, movie theaters would open at 8 a.m. and they'd close at 8 p.m. And you would walk in and you would view, the portion of the film that you walked in on, and then you would, sit through it and then wait to see how things started. It was all very segmented. And,
And this film was
once again, Hitchcock in Psycho, he changed it. He told the theaters, you have to start at 8 and you have to stop at 10.
Oh, really?
People can't walk in.
He did that?
And, because he didn't want to spoil that actress getting killed in the first third of the movie. He didn't want people to, come in at the end and then start at the beginning. Like if you ever go back, like, I'm a big video game just aficionado, and you go back and look at some of the representations of film back in the 20s and video games that have tried to show what it was like. And once again, you walk into the theater and the movie is playing and you see what you see, and then you stay as long as you want, and then you walk out. I don't know, maybe it's a bad comparison, but if you historically look at the way films were made and shown and viewed back in the 20s, it was totally different than anything that we're used to.
Yeah.
Except for the living room television. Walking in, and TNT's got what it's got on. And you can flip over to TNT West if you want to catch the earlier part.
We should talk about the political angles. Where's Wilk when you need the man?
What do you see? Do you think there's more political angles in the movie than there is in the book?
Oh, God, there's a ton.
Like, what do you mean? Wait, before you say that, can you pour me some more beer?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Let's get some more alcohol if we're going to get into politics.
Are we ready? You ready to go into politics yet?
What are you pouring there? What is that?
This is my favorite beer, Anger. It's a Bavarian, much like this.
Nice.
I was
hoping you'd say a little German during this podcast. Didn't you take German in high school and college?
I took a lot of German, yeah.
Can you say a few German words?
Vielen Dank. It means much thanks for this beer I'm about to pour you.
Is your last name German?
Yeah.
Rauch?
Rauch. It means smoke in German.
There we go. That legitimizes this whole podcast.
I've been avoiding the German themes. You guys don't want to talk about German themes.
Well, while you guys are pouring, I have a question for you. So why do you think the plant whistles sounded above ground when all the workers are below ground?
Why is there a river below ground? Why would Freymeyer, whatever his name is, build a...
Freymeyer? Where'd you get that one?
Freymeyer, it's German. I don't know, what's that guy's name?
Frederick or Fredersen?
Fredersen?
Fredersen.
Joe
Freymeyer.
Fredersen.
Why would Freymeyer build a city on a river?
Well, but that's never been
That's
answered.
bad
Is whether he
engineering.
built the city or whether he came in and he's just in control.
Ryan,
Remember that the
Ryan,
whole-
are you going to edit this out?
There's a whole aspect to
Edit this all out. All right.
What?
Why the fuck would you build a city on a river?
No,
Well, all
That's
cities
just
are
bad
generally
engineering.
they pump,
No, you
they
build
pump
cities-
out the underground. They pumped out the water from the underground.
That's a bad idea.
No. You always build cities next to rivers because they're
Next to, yes.
transportation nexuses, but they're
Why
usually
would you
on
build a city over a river? It's a terrible idea.
Well, you end up expanding to both sides of the river.
Yeah, but not above. And create pumps.
Oh,
That-
Hey,
Okay,
Chicago's got pumps out. Like Chicago got
Yeah,
the
and
whole
what
deep
happens?
water.
What happens if the workers just decide not to pump anymore?
They did in the story. It plays out.
I know, but why would you build a city there? It's a bad idea.
Well,
Well, you have to make sure a city in a non-transportation nexus is not a city. No one's going to go there.
they don't get into any of that. Why the city's there, or
Yeah, why would you? If you were going to build Metropolis, would you build it on top of like a body of water and then
But that's the
require a
point.
pumping
Why did
system?
they build it? Anyway,
they don't get.
address
They don't
that.
get into that.
Yeah.
But it is interesting.
Of course they don't.
I found it interesting that the fact that the workers are feeding this machine that sort of maintains their life.
I
Because
can't-
they gotta maintain the machine to keep the pumps
It's all
going.
like symbolism.
Okay, so
about, like,
we
worker
talk about the
versus-
workers that are below ground.
Right.
There have to be workers above ground, like Josephat. How many of them are there? Because apparently there's no room for these people below ground to come above ground, but I can't figure out who all these other
No, you
people
can't.
are.
You can't let them above ground because if you do, then they're gonna be
They're-
like, "Oh shit, I'm gonna
Well,
go
great.
do drugs
They're
in
gonna go to
the red light
Yoshiwara.
district."
But
They're going to
who
go to
else is
Yoshiwara.
there?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. So if you're a restaurant worker in Yoshiwara, you get to live above ground, but if you're a machine worker in the Heart Room, you have to work down
Yeah,
here.
and if you
What-
live
what is
20, if you live 20 miles outside the city, you'd never even heard of Metropolis.
yeah,
And then it's no big deal.
What is the delineation? But that's part of whatever. You know what? Just to appreciate the movie, because otherwise you're going to go nuts.
It's just harsh on industrialism. Like you look back
It
at the
is.
20s, it was a big farming community. Like Germans were all farmers, and like Berlin was sort of like the industrial center, I guess.
Is she,
like later on,
are
but
they commenting on industrialism? Are they commenting
I think they
on
are.
classism? I mean, they're doing this on the back end of World War I and the front end of World War II. And there's interesting
Well,
there's interesting
see,
stuff going on
you're going to edit
sociologically.
this all out. Right?
No, I'm not editing it.
You have to,
Why?
because I'm about to fucking tell you why. Because they don't know what's going to happen in World War II.
Oh,
It's
what?
like 15 years later.
Right. Okay, so why do I have to edit that out?
Because I'm swearing, and I'm drunk.
You can swear on this podcast.
Oh, okay. They didn't know what was going to happen in 1940.
Right.
So they, if you look back at like the teens, like early 20s in Germany, it was a shithole, right?
Yeah.
So she was the one thing I don't understand is
So
where
is it-
did this idea of the elite come from if the elite didn't exist back then?
Whoa. Now, you're dealing with Germany and traditional Prussia. Now, you are dealing with imperial Germany and Prussia.
In what years, though? Like, Prussia was, what, teens?
Pardon me. So the German Empire was formally established at the end of the Franco-Prussian War. So that was the 1870s. So that was like 1870 or 1873.
That's all before this.
Right.
They
So that's
they literally declared the
that's
German
what this
Empire.
is built on, right?
Well, the German Empire was formed in Versailles.
Right.
So they
Which
they
is
conquered.
what year?
Is 1870 or 1873?
1870,
I forget.
right?
Yeah. And the point gets to be that the German Empire was destroyed basically at the end of the
World
Treaty of
War I.
Versailles. It became the Weimar Republic. So you end up doing that, but realize the German country itself was relatively untouched by the war in terms of its literal structures and so
See,
forth.
I didn't think that was the case. I thought it was fucked.
No, they didn't push their way. Like, the literal destruction did not get its all the way back in. You know, they fought their way and they held them there and they negotiated and such. So again, it was not
Like a total.
no, not it was
bust.
not the Second World War, and they did it twice in a generation. So it was not going that way. But
So there was an
economic.
elite caste at that point.
But yes, you have to realize that anytime you see someone with a von in their name, it's basically like giving a sir in British. You know, it's basically saying
Thea von Harbou.
that they were a knight. You know, they were from the nobility. And you are
So
dealing...
is that why
So
she?
there was a nobility
Well, that's
at that
interesting.
time.
So is that why she That's why she.
Well, she grew up in a nobility.
Well, she wrote
essentially,
she
right?
wrote the story, and she cast Frederer, who is a sort of a
And she
member
was
of the nobility, as
she
the
was
savior. Is that why she cast Frederer as the savior of the working class?
Well,
Possibly.
she was a violinist, right? And she was a prodigy, right? Like musically, and she moved into the arts, and she moved into those things.
Where I'm trying to get is that even during the Second World War, you can find the Prussians looking down on that Bohemian corporal, a.k.a. Hitler, and so forth. You definitely have that elitism that certainly existed up until then. In the First World War, you definitely have people that are looking down, that there's the elite classes system. So no, that still was definitely in hardcore existence at that point in time.
Okay.
So Thea von Harbou looks to the elites to
She
save
was born into it.
to save
She
the
wasn't-
working class, though.
She was born into it.
But look
she
at-
was a
But that's a criticism of this. Is a nobleman?
She's looking for the liberal elite.
yes,
Yeah,
not a worker. A worker doesn't save the workers. It's an
Correct.
elite.
correct.
Yeah. And is that believable? Is it believable that Frederer, who is born of the city father,
well, no, it's not.
Well, Ra, you I think that's a question for November. Are we?
I don't think it is.
Are we going to believe that Rauner is going to save us or Pritzker?
Well, Rauner isn't going.
now you're dating this
Or
podcast.
oh, I'm sorry. Is Pritzker going to do it?
Now
Anyway.
you're dating this podcast.
Anyway,
So, but I mean, that's a criticism I've heard people say is like, like she has an elite noble person who basically saved the workers.
oh, of course she is. She's having a prince do it.
Yeah. And is that because of her background? That
I
she's Thea
think it's basically traditional German storytelling.
Ah.
I mean, you
Traditional
basically
German
have a prince, and a commoner.
And a prince who changes places with a commoner to get the commoner experience, and then he comes back around and says like, "Oh, now I know I can relate to the commoners. I'm going to save you."
yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
No, I view it that way entirely. And the, pardon me, it's just, I've got a quote that I remember from college, and I could not find the source. I was looking for it. And this goes back to my whole, the common storytelling routine. But it was, I thought it was from the Song of Roland, and I cannot find it.
Oh, didn't Tolkien do a translation of that?
I thought so.
Yeah.
But I've not found the
it's a
quote.
good
But
one.
but it was vengeance is the ecstasy of the German. It's either the German sword or the German soul, and that was one of the things that I was hanging on when I was sitting there going, "Oh, this story's about vengeance," and all that. But
You know what I was hanging on was there's a quote from, if you read, it was later on, it was like the 30s. They started talking about like the history of Germany leading up to Nazism and the threat that it imposed. And the crazy thing about, I guess, societal change, and if you want to get into politics, it's a complicated situation. But the quote was essentially that change happens incrementally. Things happen slowly. You never see the end game from the start. It's always like one step smaller. Like, is this bad? I don't know. Is this bad? I don't know. And it ties directly into what we're looking at in this country right now. When you look at like the Mexican-American border, where they're taking children from families, and is this bad? It's kind of bad, but I'm not sure about it. And they're starting to call these buildings where they're putting these Mexican children, they're ripping them from their families and calling them concentration camps. And they're saying, how do we know? How do we know as things progress? How do we know? Like, the steps are so small. You never know what's going to lead. And it's terrifying when you compare it to like a story like this one, because the one thing I hate about this book and this movie is they don't show you how it started. They don't show you step 1 to step 20. They show you what happened when it's final, when there's a elite class versus a working class. They don't show you those small steps. And
Okay, well let's take a movie that came from 6 years later, and we're going to go with Dracula. They don't show how Dracula got that way, and that was a talkie. But
true.
I mean, like,
you're right. You're right.
You know what? It gives you.
Tells you.
It
tells
tells
you
you
a story. That's
now,
right.
granted, that one had character
And maybe it doesn't
development,
have
and it had
that
plot
responsibility. You're right.
and such. But I mean, like, the camera doesn't move near as much. Oddly enough, there is better camera views. There's better framing. There's better everything in Metropolis. There's better filmmaking in Metropolis than there almost is in Dracula. Now,
True.
Dracula has its moments. Don't get me. It's got close-ups. It's got some of this other stuff, but it's actually better simply because they can talk. And there's more realistic acting in some cases. I mean, Bela Lugosi hams it up, but you know what? That's what he was hired to do. I mean, that's what he was told to do.
Is this story more terrifying because you know where it's leading? Because you know that Nazism
I think
comes
it's
out
less
of this?
so. I think it's not, it doesn't have the impact. Like, if you were to look at it from the framing of where we are right now in life and in general in America, you'd say you don't want to date it. You know, you don't want to date the podcast. But if you look at this story, like, it doesn't tell you how they got there. It doesn't tell you, like...
It doesn't tell you where they end,
like,
either.
How did he build
Right.
that city?
What
What did he
happens
build
next?
it on? Like, how did he start it? Where did the propaganda start? Why did people believe it? Why did they go down into the catacombs to start working? It's just, I don't know.
Because we do know that there's, well, from the book we know that there's people that aren't part of Metropolis.
I suppose. I don't know. I just, that was the problem I had with it is, and
No,
it's weird
you
though,
don't know what
because
the world around it is like. I get you.
Yeah,
I mean,
you're right. I mean, and the story was written in the 20s, so it shouldn't,
Except that
it
there's
shouldn't
New York.
apply to this. It shouldn't be something that we should take cues from or learn from or necessarily understand society's progression from, but it's still...
So you don't like. So what you're saying is that there's no validity to looking at this as a story. It's maybe just interesting in the perspective of film history, and that's about it.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah,
what you said.
exactly. It doesn't show you how did he come into power? How did he become the master of Metropolis? Why is he the brain of Metropolis? Like, why does the heart have to exist? Like, it just is. Like, by the point the story starts, it's too late.
Rich, do you agree with that? Do you feel like the story has no merit on its own, and it's just interesting in a film history perspective? Or do you think, after reading the book and watching the film, there is merit to the story, the narrative, on its own?
I'm going to answer that in a longer way. I'm one of those guys who did not enjoy The Last Jedi. All right,
Well,
Spoiler alert.
they also made him the world's biggest expletive deleted. But ignoring that, I thought that, when I walked out of the theater, I told the guy that I saw it with that I enjoyed it, but I didn't like it. And what I didn't like was that when they had great visions, they had great scenes, and when they did those scenes right, they were amazing. The hyperspace scene was amazing. The throne room scene was amazing. But it's like somebody walked in and said, I've got these things here. We have to figure out how to get from this point to point A to point B to point B to point C. And everything in between it was kind of filler, and it wasn't very good in my mind.
So maybe this
I thought it was
has
poor
the
writing.
same problem.
And this has the same problem. It has the gift of vision. It has these wonderful scenes that when they do them, they just hit, and they're wonderful. And, but for the movie, it really nailed them. I mean, like, let's go through it. In the beginning scene, just watching the above ground of Metropolis operate, it was spectacular, especially appreciating for that it was 1927. But I'll tell you what, I can't think of a movie until almost the 90s where you've got a fictional vista of a city operating like that. I mean, that was tremendous. You've got, okay, let's see. There's the flashlight scene. All right, that flashlight hunting scene through the catacombs.
Yeah, that was good.
I did not think that I was going to like that. And you know what? It turned out that worked rather well. Now, it was a bit melodramatic. There were a lot of arms in the airs and stuff like that. But you know what? It was a silent film, did whatever. But that was actually a very good hunting scene with that. I thought that turned out rather well. You know, they did some of those rather well. And I guess my point is that when they had their vision, when they knew exactly which one they wanted to do, they nailed it. Whether it was when Rotwang was scurrying up the ladder at the end on the cathedral with the girl over his shoulder, you know, that had to inspire not a generation, but 10 years later, the Hunchback of Notre Dame crawling up the cathedrals and things like that. It and just some of the silhouetted fighting on that I thought did well. It really did, but in between the visions, there was a lot of dead and downtime. But I mean, like even the seven deadly sins coming to life. I mean, like they knew exactly which parts they wanted to do it, but it was the time in between the stunning visions that sometimes was lacking. And whether we're talking about The Last Jedi, or hell, take Avatar. You know what? If you've got someone doing an immediate reaction, Avatar is a movie that always gets, was great praise on its vision, whatever. I never need to see that movie again. You know what? I saw it on IMAX. I never need to see it again. I've seen this now. I'm not sure that I ever need to revisit it, but I'll tell you what, I appreciate the devil out of seeing it this one time.
But it sounds like you agree with Jim in that it's more like you appreciate this for its place in film history rather than its story.
I guess my point gets to be that I knew that it had a place in history, but I never saw it. I appreciate
and now you saw
I
it.
appreciate why it's in history.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Like
I feel like it delivers in that aspect.
It delivered. I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. It delivered. So
but on its own story merits, it's like, whatever.
You know what? But there's a lot of movies like that.
Okay.
It's true.
There's a lot of films that, there are films that you like revisiting, and let me tell you what, there are a lot of films that I revisit that aren't worth junk. But you know what? That no one is ever going to talk about again. But there are some that are of merit that you only need to see once, and you never need to touch them again. Can we go back to some of the vision? Some of the vision type stuff is in the beginning of the movie. You had the choreographed workers keeping the machines going and such.
And they were choreographed. They were like in time, like a clock.
Yeah, and they were tremendous, and they did that job. I always thought the Moloch machine itself that
I saw somewhere that, and I think this description is in the book, that the machine is almost eating the workers. I believe they actually took some of the footage of the machine eating the workers. They took that from another Russian film.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, from an earlier Russian film.
Well, I'll tell you.
So it's like a dreamy kind of sequence where Fredler is imagining the workers being eaten by the machine, and then he sort of wakes up and they're not being eaten; they're just working on the machine.
Yeah,
I think that footage was actually from a different film.
Huh? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I heard a podcast mention it. I have to. Maybe I'll put a link on the website. But it's a film that I think you can even watch that film on YouTube.
Well, Moloch obviously is a I don't know, historical demon. I mean, it's a traditional demonic name. It is a tradition associated with that name. You've talked about Moloch before in your Watchmen podcast. That was the name of one of the villains in there that ended up with cancer from Dr. Manhattan. But anyway.
Oh, yeah.
And the Joker, not the Joker, the comedian ended up crying in his room and all that kind of stuff, if you recall. But Moloch had a history of, I believe it was child sacrifice, and they would also even burn them alive in there, and that's why I thought it was actually a interesting thing that they had the mouth with all the workers walking straight into it and so forth.
She talks about that in the book.
Oh yeah, no. But I mean, like, but she tried to cover every religion with the monsters of the machines.
Yeah.
And they did not try to cover every religion, the monsters of the machines, in the film, and they ignored the Pater Noster and all that, which, for those who don't know their Latin, that's the Our Father. So there was literally a holy prayer with a machine named after it in conjunction with monsters. I'm sure somebody didn't appreciate that. Things like that. But it...
Religion is such a big part of the book, and yet I feel I wouldn't call it a Christian story. It's almost it's just like thrown in.
No, they just stole the imagery and went with it.
Yeah.
And again, this one did not have quite as much stolen imagery as the other, but my goodness, it certainly did have stolen imagery. What did you think? I thought that in the movie versus the book, that Jehoshaphat and Freder's friendship was actually more realistic.
In the film?
In the film. I thought that they had, the way that they talked to each other when he went in the room, that they had a previous relationship, and therefore it continued something, versus in the book, it seemed like it just was like, I'm appropriating this destroyed man, and I'm going to be your friend now. Or you're going to be my friend, or you're going to go somewhere else.
I don't recall that. I don't recall watching the film and thinking that they had a stronger relationship. I might have just glossed over it.
Fair enough.
All right, so I am 100% on board with that. In the book, they had really almost touching relationship towards the end, especially, but like the progression of their relationship, you could see it a lot more clearly in the film. In the book, it was almost like the father was this sort of statuesque figure that lorded over everything, and Frieder's responses were rebellion / romanticism, whatever. But in the movie, like you could really see like the father cared about him a little bit, especially when he's down on his hands and knees and he's like reaching up towards the cathedral rooftop as he's fighting, and he seems so concerned. That's a wildcat. You hear that screech?
Yeah, I'm wearing headphones, so I don't know where it's coming from.
The cat
Behind
screech. That was crazy.
It's a mountain lion.
You guys ever watch the difference between lightning bugs when they're in the field versus when they're in your yard?
Yeah.
And like when they're in the field, they're these very short staccato blinks versus when they're flying in your yard.
These fields are amazing for lightning bugs.
Oh, yeah.
They really are.
Because, like, it turns into this... in high summer, like, this is just the early ones.
Yeah,
like,
in late summer, it's almost like a lightning show.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Oh, yeah.
I keep seeing some
so
of those,
different.
Those buildings light up in the distance, and I'm picturing the buildings from the movie.
I just keep
like
looking
right over
at,
there. That looks like Metropolis.
Yeah, I keep looking at...
It looks like Metropolis.
Looks so much like Metropolis.
Yeah.
And you think about the... I think about Pink Floyd a lot, and like the concepts from the wall, and like the children sort of being indoctrinated into society and then walking into the... Like, actually,
they probably
that is a great aside. Have you ever really thought... Well, maybe you guys haven't, because, I don't know, I just watched the movie earlier today, but there are so many similarities between the wall and
Pink Floyd's The Wall,
and like the people walking down those almost treadmills towards the thresher.
Yeah,
that really started in like the M machine as the bald men are walking towards the machine that eats them. Like there's a lot of imagery you can tell that has been sort of adopted in. I don't know, is Pink Floyd current, but.
They're current, yeah. You can talk about that.
I would say they're current. There's so much imagery that's been sort of.
Wasn't there an anecdote that Fritz Lang wanted like 5,000 extras and he only got like 1,000, so they had to just use 1,000 and then use some kind of technique to multiply it on screen?
Well, yeah, he's definitely a visionary. Like his cinematic style, like taking those 1,000 extras and turning them into the 5. Like rows walking towards the center,
almost like the Star of Solomon.
Of all the things that in that movie that really caught my eye, that was that scene of like the bald men walking towards the camera with the 5 rows behind. It was incredible. Like I would love to. When you think about like I don't know, this is, you can edit this out too, but I just think in terms of like
you're big on editing.
I'm telling you, like. So I feel free now to say actually what I think.
You can curse on this podcast.
I know. But I just think about, like, in terms of, like, your projects, Ryan, like, just how obsessed you get on certain things. Like, how would Ryan film this? And, like, what would he do? And how would he punish, like, the people who are involved in it? Like, I know it's totally, like, a random thought, but, like, I could just see that. Like, he took those poor people who were, like, probably hungry and just wanted to work, and he put them to work, and then he took those bald men and he split them into 5 and he was walking them towards the camera, and I can just imagine their suffering. It was probably like 100 degrees like it is today, like as we're recording this podcast.
And he was just loving it.
He's just probably just like, you will do this because this will look good and people will appreciate this like 100 years later, and some idiots will be sitting in a cornfield talking about it. If you just shut up and fucking walk towards the camera. Like, I don't know.
Well, it's like he used the actress who played Maria as he didn't have a stunt woman for her. He used her to do...
Yeah, didn't he light her on fire at one point?
Yeah, like, I think she caught... Well, he didn't light her on fire.
I was looking for the scene where...
She caught on fire. I think she caught on fire.
Did you read that part about how, like, she was... like one of the actors had to like pull her by the hair to like pull her into the scene.
I think I saw that.
And I was looking for that scene. Like,
I think I saw it.
I rewound the movie a few times. Like, where does her hair get pulled? Like,
I think it was the mob scene.
Yeah. I think I saw where like some actor grabs her by the hair and just pulls her on stage or whatever. Yeah. And I think she caught fire in some place.
So what was your guys' thought of Rotwang, his depiction in the movie versus the book? Did you guys?
He looked like Nosferatu. That's what he looked like.
Really? Nosferatu?
Oh yeah,
Nosferatu had no hair.
Did you see the eyebrows?
Okay.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, I mean, like, in some cases that was a kind of joke I wrote down in my notes is like, the difference between with the makeup and the style is, the Freder, if you look at him, he's painted so white that his hands are a different color. I mean, like, the man obviously could get a tan, but, his face certainly could. But, I mean, like, and that was just the style, I think, of how they did the makeup on the faces of all those guys. So
Yeah. Someone was commenting on a podcast about, like, the scene with the Club of Suns, of how, like, their faces are all powdered when they're going to run on the track.
Yeah.
And it looks, like, weird.
Yeah, that and Fred Air wasn't racing on the track. But whatever. I couldn't figure out who the main character was for, like, a while.
I just like to compare the work ethic that he probably put on those poor actors compared to Ryan making us read the book and read the movie and texting us constantly, like, what page are you on? How far along
I can't
are
argue
you?
that. Ryan's texting in leading up to this podcast.
It's elite. It's elite status.
Yeah, if you were going to make a movie...
He ignores me for years at a time.
I can't believe that you haven't touched on, like, the similarities between you and Fritz. Like, just that you will sacrifice your health for this.
All for the vision. So 100 years from now, people will look at this podcast and go, genius! It's a genius podcast!
Yeah, and me and
that's
Rich
exactly what it's like.
will have been the guys who suffered.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
Like, I was at work.
But I guess my question gets to be, so Rotwang is almost... I've heard it described as almost the prototypical mad scientist.
Yeah, isn't he like the first mad scientist on film?
Did you interpret him as the mad scientist in the book?
I didn't. I'll say that much. I really didn't.
That's a good question.
That's where I'm asking.
I don't know. I feel like I did, but I feel like
it was easier to do him as a mad scientist in the movie. And in the book, I did not get him across that way. I got him across as kind of a moody, vengeful creator.
But they say inventor.
I know.
I always took it as a plot progressor. Like, in the book, like, his whole purpose is just to progress the plot. Like, this is, from step A to step B. Like, he served a purpose and that was it. And I feel like in the movie he could have meant so much more.
Well, in the movie, he was he was the one who was the overdramatic one. Rotwang.
I didn't get
he's
that.
the one who was the... I've got the robot hand. Look at me. I've got a robot hand.
Oh, what did you want to say about his hands?
Table.
You said their hands. You said the hands were different in the book than the movie.
Well, the robot hand. Well, he acquired it in a different way. So in the book, he mentioned that he forgot something twice. So he forgot once that some oil or other had a different reaction. That's how he lost his arm. And then he forgot that Hell was a woman and that Joe Fredersen
was a man. Yeah.
Was a man, and that's how he lost his wife.
Yeah.
And in the movie, he says, the only time I ever forgot anything was that I forgot that Hell was a woman and you were a man.
Yeah.
and something how, well, I did this, but it cost me my hand, but it was worth it. And I don't remember whether it was making the robot or whatever. Which, by the way, is never called a robot. It's called a machine person, but whatever.
But he has a supposedly
in
robot
the movie,
hand.
they totally simplified it. And once again, it was like all simplification. Like,
well, how are you going to explain that?
In the book, it does say, like, it spells that out exactly, like, in the dialogue. And
oh, no,
I
just
took,
mean,
like, a clip of it and showed it.
Think about, like, the house in the way they describe it. The way they describe the house...
His hand inspires Dr. Strangelove in...
supposedly.
How
I learned to quit worrying and love the bomb.
Yeah. That glove. Yeah.
Peter Sellers routine. Yeah. And such. But I mean, like, nuts.
So you felt like there was a big contrast between the portrayal of Rotwang in the book and the movie?
I thought he was a moody creator in the book, and he was a mad scientist in the movie.
I guess I could go along with that.
I felt like he was a plot device.
That being said, in the movie, why wouldn't you do that? Everything else is the biggest thing possible. You need the bombastic character who is the antagonist. I mean, you need it. Yeah. So, I mean, like, and you had...
Yeah, they play him up more as an antagonist in the movie, you're saying.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Because this movie couldn't make up the book couldn't make up its sense, and in some cases, the movie...
Is the book more nuanced?
Who's the bad guy?
Is the book more nuanced than the movie then? Because Rotwang is less obviously evil.
Nuanced makes me think that it has style. As everyone agreed here, this book is a tough read. It's not enjoyable. I don't think it's nuanced. I think it's just got too much. It's too packed.
Yeah. And so the movie is more focused
the movie, oddly enough, is more focused.
Yeah.
It got rid of some of the jute. It got rid of the organ scene. It got rid of the cathedral and the Gothics, and it got rid of all that. It turned the slim into the thin man, but then it kind of combined him with the preacher
we haven't talked about
at the
Slim
cathedral.
at all.
Well, Slim was
I heard a podcast describe him as like the classic henchman dogging. He was one of the main
that's
elements
about right.
cut. He was one of the main elements cut in the pre-2010 version. I believe.
I can believe that.
He got way more fleshed out.
What was the point of the apartment scene without the plane scene and without the other stuff? They could have eliminated all that and just called it a day.
Yeah.
I mean, you didn't need it.
What is the point of Slim? He's loyal to...
What is the point of the whole thing?
Well, and that's why I got frustrated and said the whole movie's about revenge. Because you know what? It's not about worker revolt. It's a terrible love story. So I'm going with revenge because it's the most complete storyline.
Yeah, I guess that you could make a case for that. It's
Oh yeah, no. I'm not trying to actually win the argument. I just
no.
You know
I mean, there is no argument. It's a question.
It's a confused thing. What is the story?
What is the point? I don't know.
That being said, when I got done with the movie, I enjoyed it. I was glad I saw it. It was a visual wonder. So,
I don't know, what was the point, Ryan? What was the point of this?
Well, like the slim man.
It's
like
got to mean something more than just us hanging out and drinking and talking. Like what did you take away from this? Why did you make us do this?
Oh, no.
I'll tell you why I did it. I mean,
Why?
I did it because because what I like doing on this podcast is covering subjects that I've heard about but I've not seen before or not read before. So Metropolis is one of those things. It's like I've heard about it, but I don't really know much about it, and so like it just made me curious. Like this is supposed to be this great film, and it doesn't matter if it's supposed to be a great film or a great book. I just like if it's either a great book or a great film, that's good enough for me. It doesn't have to be both. So I heard it was a great film, so I was like, all right, and it was a book first? Cool, let's check it out. And then I found out like it's kind of this gray area hybrid novelization thing. Fine, let's still check it out. And it is very fascinating. The story behind the film, the restoration.
What about it though? What's fascinating about it?
Everything, the restoration, the history of the film. I found watching the film in context with the book very enjoyable. I was surprised how much I was able to enjoy the film. I mean, I went into it very open-minded. I did. But even with that, I was like, I did not feel like the acting was overdramatic. I thought the visuals were very, very interesting, constant, and there was always something going on. The music complemented what was going on the screen. I was like, I did get tired of it at the end. I was like 2.5 hours into it, and I was late at night. But I was like, this is, in the 2000s, 2018 or whatever, when we're watching this, I was like, I'm enjoying this.
I'll tell you
and
what.
I could see how this influenced other things. So I enjoyed this in the context of film history. I enjoyed it on its own.
Yeah, I guess that's the question, too.
But
you told me, like, when I was struggling with it,
yeah.
You told me I like to try to put myself in the context of when this was made and what people might be experiencing originally. Like, why'd you make me watch this?
Okay, so here's an interesting thing. So I was just sitting there going, all right, this is a 2.5-hour silent movie.
Yeah.
That's like near Avatar level.
No, actually, it's near Marvel level. I'll tell you what.
Marvel.
I remember more about Avatar than I will remember about Age of Ultron. You know what? And
that's Avengers 2?
I don't know. It's one of the Avengers ones, but but that's my point. They're both about 2.5 hours. They both have robots. They both do a lot of things, but I'll tell you what, I remember a heck of a lot more of the imagery and everything else, and Metropolis is far more inspirational than something that earned a couple, 100 million more than that.
Mm-hmm.
Did it strike you as socially relevant?
Age of Ultron, not particularly.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Metropolis. Like, did you see this and recognize like signs from history versus
I feel like Jim is hitting at the main point of this. Is this movie interesting on its own, or is it just interesting?
How is it relevant?
Or is it just interesting in its film history because it influenced so much afterwards?
What do you mean by relevant?
I mean, in terms of the hand versus the brain versus the heart, do you think that was a solid
fluff.
story? It was all fluff.
Pardon me. That is my entire contention, is that all of that stuff is window dressing. That is why I went with Rotwang as my plot, because you know what? The rest of it is all fluff. It is all window dressing. it doesn't do anything for me. You know what? You could argue for any other plotline that you want, but I found no consistency. I thought that all the visions were hollow. I mean, like, they were there to show you a show, and then they disappeared. And you know what? That was it. They were there to entertain you for that spec, and they were gone. It was hollow, but you know what? As far as I was concerned, in this movie, that was enough for me.
What about, like, in terms of late 20s, early 30s Germany versus the political landscape now?
Didn't do anything for me.
Nothing.
Yeah.
See, that was the only chord that it struck with me, was the importance of, I guess... See, that's where the movie... It was hollow, but it also struck a chord. Was we don't know how we got where we are, but this is where it will end, and this is what we need in terms of the heart versus the hand and the brain. Like, we don't have a heart right now, and I think that there was a certain amount of relevance at the end of the day.
Did you enjoy the movie a lot more than the book?
Oh, for sure.
I'm sorry, did anyone enjoy the book? And I mean, like, when you got done
I think the weird thing about, like, your podcast in this situation is I think the book was written so that the movie could be filmed. I really do.
Yeah.
I mean, like, you figure wife and
it
husband...
definitely was more than most books. I mean,
I think they worked together thinking, this is the film we want to make. How can the story be told? And I think that she wrote the book I think she wrote the book so that the movie could be filmed. I really do.
I don't know that that's in dispute. I think you're right about that. I mean, she was already collaborating with Fritz at this point, right?
She was married, right?
Yeah, I don't think this was their first.
I almost wonder if they
venture.
if they wrote it together.
I think they did.
Oh, obviously, I thought. So I think he was like, I want to do this, and this. I want to have this, and this. And she wrote it up to put it all in there. And again, I
think she was a novelist in her own right.
Oh, yeah, no. But I think there's the grand set pieces, and then there's fitting it all together.
Yeah.
But this movie is a storyboard. The novel was a storyboard.
Yes, it was.
More than it was a novel. There's no character development. There's no nothing. But it is taking you from one scene to the next, and that's what I'm saying is, like, for all you know, they wrote this novel just enough to get the funding to get the movie through. You know, it's just to get the extra $5 million loans to UFA. You know,
They wanted to make. I think when they went to New York and they saw how much money Hollywood was spending, they were like, "We need to make a movie that's also very expensive."
Yeah.
When they conceived this thing, and they wanted to be this. Fritz Lang said he enjoyed filming this, and then when it resulted, he was like, he didn't like it. He thought it was too simplistic. That said,
it's the artist's curse.
Later in life, he changed his mind. He said he used to teach classes, and he saw students in modernity who would say, you know, computers in the modern world, they lack heart. We're separated from our society. And that's when he thought, oh, the simplistic message that Thea von Harbou came up with in the story, that the heart is the mediator between the hands and the brain, he realized later in life that she had something there, that she struck a chord there. And he changed his mind. So he went from enjoying the film to being like, I don't really like the film, I don't really want to talk about it, it's not that great, to later in life being like, oh, maybe there was something to the actual story of it.
And how does that relate now?
Well,
that's the one thing
I mean, it goes back to the story of, I don't feel like this is totally about a class struggle as it is about man relating to man. And I talked about in the last episode about familial relationships and man finding heart within relating to other men and women.
I would say my biggest disappointment in the analysis that you've given is as I was...
Here's the wind-up and the pitch.
Of the many disappointments.
No. As I was reading it and as I was watching the movie, the comparative sort of... I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. As I was reading it and as I was watching this movie, I was thinking, like, why would Ryan make me do this? What point is he trying to make?
How did I wrong Ryan?
No.
He wanted me to do this.
No, for real. Like, I was reading this book and watching this movie, and I was thinking, why in the hell would Ryan make me do this now? Like, what does it matter? Like, why would anyone care?
But you know I'd never read this before, right?
And did
you know that?
I knew that, but
okay.
it struck me as almost like a...
It's So it's not
like there is a relevance.
It's
here.
not like I read this and said you have to read this. I was
no,
like,
I know, but
yeah.
Don't you do these things because there's a purpose? Like, don't you do this? Don't you make these podcasts because you want people to think?
Well, again,
Yeah.
I think that Metropolis is considered a classic, and I certainly see why.
Yeah, but there's a lot of classics out there. Like, why now? Why would you want people to care about a class struggle film / book that was written 100 years ago now?
Oh, you're expecting Ryan to have context and depth and meaning.
I was.
No.
My thought was
Ryan is here to create difficulty for others.
Well, I understand that.
Oh, you sound like Wilk.
But like when you think about the comparative
Ryan's
nature
purpose
of like 1927 Germany versus 2018 United States, like there are a lot of strange comparisons. Like when you really sit back and think about it, this is kind of what I was hoping we'd get into a little bit more on this podcast, is why now? Like, why would you spend the time to read this and think about this now? And the answer is because it's relevant, because those small steps that led from 1927 to 1945 are starting now. You see a lot of the same societal issues cropping up. You see, buildings full of children that have been taken from Mexican parents in New Mexico right now, on Mexico borders. Like, why haven't you addressed this? Don't you see the similarities? Like, why would you want this to be read and viewed now by people?
Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't specifically pick this because of any particular current topic. I picked it quite simply because I thought...
Because it's a masterpiece of history.
Well, it's a supposed masterpiece, and I wanted to understand why.
But there's so much more there. Like,
if it is a true masterpiece, if it is, then I think, yes, it should have universal appeal and relevance in the 1920s and now. I mean, I think most masterpieces are relevant universally throughout their ages. And it's interesting to me that you're finding relevance nowadays when you struggled so much with the actual reading and watching of it, but you still found a relevance to it. So maybe that does lend credence to the actual underlying story.
It's actually good.
Well, yeah. I mean, even though you had trouble with it,
it's terrible to read.
You're still finding relevance.
Well, for sure.
So maybe Thea von Harbou tapped into something. Whether or not she was fully successful, she tapped into enough for you to get something out of it.
Yeah, and what was the ultimate result?
Again, I think that kind of goes back to my rant that I think I had in the earlier podcast, is just about it's all meaningless. Seriously.
What, are you saying life is meaningless?
No, I'm saying that the story itself was window dressing at best. Everything was symbolism, but it was hollow symbolism. It never took you anywhere. You got zero resolution on any of the plots and such. So, hey, man.
And those things are all true. It's all true. But when you look historically, like, look what happened 15 years later after this was made. Look at her history in Nazi Germany. She was a Nazi sympathizer in the late 20s, early 30s, as things were starting, as, society was progressing towards what ultimately became the worst thing that ever fucking happened. Like,
do you see this story as somewhat prophetic? I mean,
not even somewhat, like totally prophetic. Like, this is where we are.
I saw an interview with Fritz Lang, and he's very dismissive about that, I feel like. And I think it was the William Friedkin interview. And he's basically, William Friedkin is pressing him about, how this movie is like a reflection of the time of what's going on.
He bailed. He fucking went to Paris.
Well,
when Goebbels sat him down, what did he do? He counted the fucking minutes and he left and went to Paris.
Yes, he eventually did. But I do believe that an artist does not always have the final say about the interpretation of their work. And so I think that Fritz Lang didn't realize
how much... he hated the fact that they loved it, right?
Well, I think he didn't... I don't think he fully understood how much a reflection of the time that it was. I don't think he was intentionally trying to reflect the times. I think he was just intentionally following his passion, just like Joe Frederiksen was in the story. And it just resulted in being a very acute reflection of what was going on at the time, and very influential. More so than Fritz Lang even intended or understood. So this movie has more relevance than the creator even knew it could.
If I recall correctly, wasn't the beer hall pushed in like 33? So, I mean, this is...
The beer hall, what do you mean?
When Hitler finally took over.
Oh.
As much as we're talking about, this is 1927.
Mm-hmm.
It's my recollection, the beer hall pushed, or maybe it was Crystal Knocked, or all of them were in the same year, but that was about 33. I mean...
33 is the year that I believe Fritz Lang left.
Okay, so that's my point, is that's 6 years later. So, I mean, as much as you're talking about it being a reflection of the times, times were not quite there yet.
Well, a reflection of the growing unrest, of the movement leading to what happened. I mean, the German Expressionism, the dissatisfaction, the search for some kind of solution.
And the ultimate nationalism from it.
Maybe. I mean, I feel like...
it's a very nationalistic book, in a way.
Well, that's what the Germans wanted, right? In their interpretation of it. The Nazis.
Yeah.
Don't make me read the inside front cover to you, Ryan. It says it's not any country,
Well, I did read it.
Yeah, Crystal
I
Knocked
read it in the last episode.
31, I believe.
But, I mean, I think that happens...
Was it that early?
I think that happens to a lot of artists where things have more relevance than the artist even intended. So
it takes on a life of its own.
Yes, right. And we're not limited to Fritz Lang or Thea von Harbou's vision.
But the relevance is there.
Yeah, so maybe that all adds to the mystique of this. And it all gets back to why watch this, why view it, why read it. Is it because of the story itself that was written, or is it because of what's going on around it? This movie is interesting because Nazi Germany came right afterward, and this was made in the incubator of that time period. And this also influenced many filmmakers afterwards. That adds to the influence of it. The story itself probably has problems. And on its own merits, it's less successful. Why don't we go into final comments? I think we've talked this pretty good. I'll go to you first, Rich. Any final comments, and let's get your star rating on the film itself.
Oh, well, the film itself gets 5 woo from me.
5 out of 5.
I'm sorry, this is a masterpiece of silent film sci-fi. It is and if you compare it to silent film, this is top end. I mean, you're not gonna find anything better. And I've made the argument that you should consider it to be kind of its own art form. I cannot endorse it more highly than that compared against that. But that being said, if you do not like silent film, you're probably not going to like this. You know what? Go find a YouTube clip where it does some cuts from it and show you the highlights of the actual Metropolis city functioning and the robot changing scenes and some of the flood stuff, and call it a day. Because you know what? I get why you may not want to watch 2.5 hours of this and such. But you know what? I will remember these things.
Okay. I'm going to give this 4.5 stars. I considered giving this 5 stars. I don't have a vast knowledge of silent films to say this is the best silent film ever, and I'm going to give it 4.5 stars because I think this.
You're still waiting to watch that Cthulhu film. You want to give that one a 5, right?
No, I give it 4.5 because I feel like this underlying story is not perfect.
True.
And which we have been talking about, and I feel like the film in itself has a lot of worthy interest. Whether it's the storyline of its cutting and what resulted, whether it's Fritz Lang and his interesting background and the historical context, that all boosts this movie. Also, I was so impressed with this movie when I watched it and the production of it and learning about it. And we didn't even get into all the different effects and techniques that were involved that they invented just to make this movie. I was not, I was enthralled with this movie. It was very engaging. I mean, it's a long movie, but I was ready to be impressed, and I was impressed, and I felt like it delivered. So that's why it gets 4.5 stars. It doesn't get 5 stars for me because I feel like the underlying story on its own has flaws for all the various reasons we talked about, and in the underlying book, which had flaws. I did find value and meaning in the underlying story, which I talked about, the familiar relationships in the last episode. That's what I gleaned from it, but it just wasn't quite 5 out of 5. So I'm gonna stick with 4.5. All right, Jim, let's go to you. Out of 5 stars, how many would you give this, and any final comments you got about it?
All right, you ready?
Yeah, we're ready.
All right, how much time you got?
We got whatever you want.
All right. Shit.
Uh-oh.
All right. Here we go. This is what I think. What do I think? You want to know what I think, Ryan? I'll tell you what I think. I'm going to tell you what I think. I think that if you take a film and judge it based on what it is, this is like 3 out of 5 for me, maybe 2 out of 5 because it's old as hell.
Ooh.
But if you judge something based on how it makes you feel and what it makes you think, I would say it's 5 out of 5 because
What?
I hated it. I fucking hated it.
Oh.
But it made me think
Ah.
a lot. And I think that any artist, ultimately, their goal is to make someone think, right?
Okay, sure,
And
yeah, I agree with that.
What it made me think about was the fact that this movie was made, late 20s, early 30s in Germany before Nazis rose to power. And as much as it sucked to watch it and to read it, it made me think about the comparisons to what we're dealing with now. And that's one thing that I wish we would have gotten into deeper a little bit. I think that when you look at like the upper class and the lower class and all that shit, it was very, I don't know, dull in a way. But when you look at what happened next, the big things about, like, for me, like reading and trying to understand history, and Rich could probably, add to this to a certain extent. Like, why do you study history? To know what happens next? Because the past is the greatest predictor of future events. And it's one of the only givens. The past, it's the greatest predictor of future events. You look at people's behaviors, you look at life, you look at society, and you look at what fucking happened next after that. And I feel like we are right there. You look at, some of the shit that's going on right now on the Mexican border. You look at kids being taken away from their parents. You look at them being put in basically prisons. And you look at Trump and all that shit. And I know you don't want to date it by getting all political, but, I think that we are there. We're right there, and we're staring at it, and it's those incremental little fucking things, like the one step to the second step to the third step. Like Kristallnacht didn't lead immediately to fucking Dachau, Like, it was a fucking 15-year progression, and that's what we're looking at now. We're looking at, racism. We're looking at blatant fucking, like, tariffs against our friends. We're friends with Korea now and all that shit. And it made me think about all that. And, I don't like thinking about shit like that because it's not pleasant. But, this whole...
And this book made you think of it?
It did.
And this film?
It did, because you look at historically, like, what happened with her, what happened with him, what happened with the story. Like, he left, he went to Paris. Like, Goebbels sat him down. Hitler loved this shit. Why didn't he fucking do something? Like, you're a Jew, and Goebbels is gonna sit you down and say,
Now, he didn't consider himself a Jew. He considered himself a Catholic. But
or an atheist.
Why did he leave then? Like,
was raised Catholic.
Not, like, Goebbels sat him down and said, "You're not Jewish anymore. You're German. Like, you're an honorary German citizen." Like, and he left. Mm-hmm. Like, that is the kind of shit that we're looking at. And it's really deep, and it fucking sucks, and it's not fun to talk about, but that's what this whole thing got me thinking about, and,
So how many stars do you give the film then? Because you were kind of...
I guess, we're all the center of our own perception. And I would give it 0 out of 5 because I didn't enjoy watching a silent film, but I would give it 5 out of 5 because the shit it made me think about. And
so okay, so marry those two. Do you give it 2.5 then?
I don't know. What do you think?
I want to know what you think.
What is it worth? Is it worth 0 or is it worth 5?
I give my star rating. If I have to pin you down,
Ryan? If you have to give him money to get a rating out of him, give him the money, will you?
No. So.
I think that...
Are you going to give it 0 or 5?
For me, it's a 5. In general, I didn't enjoy it, but it really does make you think. I mean, the themes of it were generic,
but Jim,
it does strike...
In all fairness...
And that's what art is. Art is generic, and it's always abstract, and it always... it's always designed to initiate a response, which isn't always, something you
But we're
want,
just talking about this film.
Well,
So if I got to put down on the website a star rating for you, what am I putting? 0 or 5?
I don't know.
Oh, come on.
Your choice.
No, you tell me.
What are you doing this for? Are you doing it to
to
create thought? Or are you doing it because you want to know
matter.
how much a person liked the movie?
It doesn't matter. It's your take. I want to know from you.
My take is we're fucked.
So out of 5 stars?
We're fucked out of 5.
So what are you going to say?
I'm going to say that we're fucked out of 5.
Come on. Give me a number. I want to pin you down. I think it's interesting that you're saying 0 or 5. But if you gotta come down somewhere, where do you come down?
I don't know. I would like to know, did you guys take that from this?
It doesn't matter what we came up with. What do you come with?
What do you rank Johnny Mnemonic?
I never saw that.
Okay.
No.
What do you rank Wing Commander?
I never saw that.
Oh. Give him another one he hasn't seen.
Apparently, I can pick anything. What do you rank The Matrix?
5 out of 5.
All right.
See, I would have considered that very predictive plot. It was very generic. It didn't do anything else. I would have ranked that far lower. But
all right. So then, if that's a 5 out of 5, do you consider this 5 out of 5?
I don't know. I guess if you're gonna press me, I don't know. I don't think that what you do needs a star rating.
What the hell does that mean?
Like podcasts and books and movies should exist to inspire thought.
Just give me a fucking star rating for the damn website.
You've wasted 2.5 hours watching the movie. You've wasted more than that on this podcast thus far.
Yes.
And by the way, you must have wasted 3 or 5
was it a waste,
or 8 hours.
It was a waste.
Reading the book. Just put a number on it. It's 1:25 in the morning.
Well,
I'm going home.
Wait. It's interesting because you came up with a star rating for the book. Why don't you come up with a star rating for the movie? Did you like the book?
The book was easier because no one liked it.
Well, did you like the book more than the movie, or like the movie more than the book?
Hold on, that's a fair question.
Jim,
what?
Did you like the movie more than the book, or the verse?
I don't know. I honestly don't know.
I think you need to call him tomorrow morning at 11 and get a better answer.
There is no better answer.
Did you like the book? No, you didn't like the book, right?
No, it was terrible. It was horrible to read.
So did you like the movie more than the book?
I did.
Okay, then it's not a 0.
But do the stars you give ever represent how you feel about things afterwards, the things that makes you think?
Yes. I mean, I've been on this podcast, and and I think other people have changed their initial star. They came into the podcast with an initial star rating, and then after the discussion, they decided they were going to change their star rating. I
guess my question is, what do you want? I would give it 3 out of 5.
Okay,
it wasn't fun to watch,
it made sense.
It made me think about a lot of shit.
What can I ask you this? Before we recorded this podcast, you would have gave it less than 3 out of 5.
It's a silent film from the 20s. I mean,
well, for whatever reason, do you feel like your rating went up after the discussion?
You have to qualify it more.
I'm asking you. Do you think your rating went up after the discussion?
I honestly feel very strongly about this right now, so I don't know what kind of star you want.
No, 3 out of 5 is fine. But I'm saying, would you have given it less stars before we started recording?
Probably.
Okay, so you probably came up after...
Probably, actually, before 10 beers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have given it less stars.
Okay, so you came up after the discussion.
3 out of 5.
That happens on this podcast. I've raised my star rating after the discussion, and I think other people have raised their star rating after the discussion. All right, fair enough. So we got you down for a 3 out of 5. That is Metropolis. This might be the longest podcast recording we've had on this podcast. I want to thank everyone for listening. Visit our podcast at nodeodorant.com, www.nodeodorant.com. You can follow us and rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts. We're also on YouTube, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher Radio, Google Play, pretty much any place you can find podcasts. Join us there, and until then, we'll say goodnight. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
We bid you a very fond farewell.
All right. Good night.
For more information on the topics discussed in this episode, or to read our show notes and find us on social media, visit nodeodorant.com. For more information on Ryan Sean O'Reilly and his various works of fiction, visit ryanseano'reilly.com. The theme music for this podcast was written by John Doyle from the band I Decline. You can visit him at i-decline.com. Voiceover for this podcast was provided by me, Margaret O'Reilly. Well, that concludes our episode. We hope you've learned a lot. Again, thanks for listening to our show. And always remember, there is no deodorant in outer space.
I'm opening this with a Popener. It's an opener that was blessed by the Pope in Rome.
Talk louder.
This opener of this beer was blessed by the Pope about 20 years ago. Squirrel.
That's not
Yeah, it's a 13-line ground squirrel.
13 leg.
Line.
All right, pour away.
What? So are we eating
How
squirrel?
do you know so much about squirrels?
I saw
I came here.
Deadpool 2 before
Really?
I came here, so I am like primed. By the way, did anyone else see Deadpool 2?
No. Oh, neither have I.
I'm not.
What? Neither of you two
I'm not
assholes have
proud
seen
of it.
Deadpool?
No.
I'm not proud of it.
Dude! Lowest movie.
Sorry, suckers.
Those suckers.
Good luck. Have fun the next 11 minutes.
Okay,
I tried to get him to do fucking Lord of the Rings. He won't
Alright, so
touch
what'd
it.
you think of the movie?
It's a
Wait,
silent
wait.
film.
All right. Come on. Let's go. All
Alright, let's do it.
We're
Let's
gonna
do
start
this.
talking about it. Let's do it.
Let's do this.
We're gonna blow our wads early.
God forbid.
O'Reilly problem. The rest of us can have a second wad.
Hey, there's a reason they invented Viagra. Who's picking the next beer? What do you have next?
I have a wheat beer.
All right. Well, that'll be after I.
It'll be like dessert for you guys.
Yeah, after I blow my mind. with
Yeah,
this.
I'm gonna have to be like, Garçon, be so
Coffee.
kind.
Garçon, coffee.
Garçon means boy. Yeah, what's your point?
All right. Are you on your mic?
Whatever.
What happened to the headlamp?
That's my point. I don't need the headlamp.
Uh-oh.
Oh, fine. You want that? You want me to do the headlamp just so everyone knows where everything's at? No problem.
It's my point of reference.
Okay, you got it.
God, this is strong. Holy shit. What'd you think of the movie? There's
Wait.
no talking.
Oh, here, we'll just make it creepy for everyone. How about this? There
Oh,
we go.
nice.
Yeah.
That's fine.
It's like Metropolis it's like the impending doom.
Okay.
All basically I'm doing is highlighting my crotch. You know what? This actually sounds like a great idea.
What do you want?
If you want to throw more fire on the
More fire on the wood?
more wood
Throw
on the fire, go
another
ahead and do that
log
right now
on
before
the
we start.
fire.
Just don't throw the mic in. As I watch Beam crack big trees, I keep thinking of like Frankenstein monster in the woods, just bashing through trees. Fire, bad.
I'd like to disagree. I don't recall the Frankenstein monster breaking through trees, but
Doesn't he go crash through the woods?
I don't think Karloff could see that well in the costume makeup. So I think that he pretty much was just moving through the set.
Well, I'm talking about the movie.
Yeah.
Oh, he's just throwing shit on there.
Yeah, that tree's gonna catch on fire. This is gonna be great.
Oh, wait.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh, we'll have to hold on a second.
No, that's all right. Jim is taking a powder.
Jim is powdering his nose for his close-up. Get on, Mike.
All right, hold on.
Sir James. We're talking about Josaphat here.
Oh, my favorite. All right, I'm back.
Okay, what do you got to say? Rich is saying that Josaphat and Frederick.
Rich is 100% correct on that one.
Go ahead.
In the book,
Yes.
it was very almost linear, their relationship. There was no interaction that really gave you a sense of. No, don't.
And now Ryan is powdering his nose.
Not over there. That's
Okay.
the brush pile.
Yeah, and you're lit. Anyway.
All right, so.
Go on.
Oh, is it my turn to talk?
Sure, do it.
All right. Hold on. I need a drink. Ryan, you can edit this out later. Break time.
Jim.
I have to pee. Go ahead, Ryan.
All right, I'll give my final comment.
I have to think about this.
All right, you think about it.
You let us know how many shakes out of 5.